Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Pastor Steve Green, and this is Keystone Church. That's right, we've changed our name. Keystone was the name of our community, now called Breton, when it was first established. So there is a historic element to the name Keystone. Also, literally, the keystone is the top stone in an arch, and it's the most important stone. Figuratively, the keystone is the principle upon which other principles rest. And so that fits well with who we are. It fits well with who Jesus is in particular. Jesus is the keystone. All principles of life, valid, eternal, meaningful principles of life, rest upon him and who he is and what he does and what he said. We could even take it a step further. And Jesus said, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. And so this pursuit of the kingdom, this pursuit of his righteousness is the keystone. In other words, it is the principle of life upon which other principles rest. Even other kingdom principles rest on the pursuit of righteousness. We'll see an example of that later today. So there's a brief description behind it. We could certainly add a lot more, but I want to get into our message today. Our message is Living in His Love. That's the title. It's for March 3rd, 2024. Let me begin with the story. It was a Sunday night, late Sunday night, fried chicken restaurant in Miami, Florida. Went by the name of Church's Texas Chicken. And an ex-con, a rowdy ex-con by the name of Gary Robinson, lurched drunkenly into the restaurant, and he shoved his way to the front of the line, and he ordered a box of fried chicken, 3-piece box of fried chicken. And the staff informed him that he can't do that. He needs to go to the back of the line. He needs to wait his turn. And he was willing to do that. So he went to the back of the line. 5 or 10 minutes later, he was once again at the counter, where he was now informed that the restaurant was out of fried chicken. The young lady at the counter suggested to him he might wish to have chicken nuggets. He did not want to have chicken nuggets, so he punched her in the head. One thing led to another, the end result being that Gary Robinson was shot dead by a security guard. He was shot dead. The story was assigned to a reporter for the Miami Herald, and so she wrote an article, and the first line of her article, only 4 words long, read like this: Gary Robinson died hungry. So I tell that story because that's what the Bible is like sometimes. God will take various issues that are deep issues, and today what we're talking about is how to live. How to live. And so God will take issues that are deep and have many details to them and are very nuanced, and at different times he will endeavor to express the main idea as simply and as briefly as possible, much as this lady did in her article, getting right to the point, 4 words. Kind of told the whole story. More details, of course, but in a nutshell, it told the whole story. God is like that also. So we're talking about how to live. That's our subject. And we'll see how God takes this big subject and endeavors to present it to us very briefly and very simply in different ways. But let's begin by looking at this question of how to live, and we could phrase it different ways. It's how does life work in the kingdom? How does life work in God's world? How does life work? How do we make life work for us? How do we participate in an advantageous way in this system? How does life work? So there are different ideas. And I think these will be familiar to you, but different ideas in the Christian world about how to live. One would go something like this: be a good person, do the best that I can, and if I'm ever in trouble, or I don't know what to do, or I'm under pressure, or I need help, then pray. So that would be, in a nutshell, a common approach in the Christian world to the question of how do you live. Now, there's a problem with that. Now, let me say first of all that there's some good things about that. Praying is a good idea for sure. Taking things to God, being conscious of God, asking for God's help, bringing Him into the loop. All of these are going to be good things. That being said, this is not, though, if we're going to get right to the heart of it and try to put it as simply and briefly as possible, this is not that. Because there is something more basic, more fundamental than do the best that you can and pray. We read this in more than one place. For example, in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 12, Peter says, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are open to their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And so His ears are open to their prayers. His ears are open to the prayers of the righteous. And so prayer then is not the basic thing in terms of how to live. It's living righteously. Living righteously, that is going to be the more basic thing, and then our prayers will tend to be answered more favorably for us. We read a very similar thing in 1 John 3:22, and whatever we ask we receive from Him because we keep His commandments. So there again, there's something more fundamental in our relationship with God than prayer. It's keeping His commandments. So that's one idea, a common idea in the Christian world. Another idea, maybe not as common, but still pretty common over all the years. This is something that I've noticed it's always there. The Galatians, and they're a good example of this, and we'll be using the book of Galatians today. The Galatians were being taught by Paul's adversaries to live according to the law of Moses. So that would be an answer to the question, how do you live? And so their answer was, well, you get saved, as we all know how to get saved. But then after you're saved, you got to live. Hopefully you have a long life after you get saved. And so you have to know how to live. And so they're saying the way that you live is by following the law of Moses. Paul in Galatians very, very clearly condemns, and that's not too strong a word, he condemns this idea repeatedly. In one place, just to pick one, in Galatians 3:10, Paul says, for as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. So there you go. That would be a good reason to not follow the law of Moses, because Paul says everybody who tries to follow the law of Moses just ends up under a curse. So pretty solid reasoning. A third way of living, and we'll go to Jesus on this one, so I think you can attach a high degree of reliability to this. Jesus said, if you keep my commandments, you will abide, or you will live in my love. And so that would be a pretty good way of living then. It would be the way that Jesus said, if you do this, then you will live in His love if we keep His commandments. By the way, that fits pretty well with what we read earlier, where in 1 John, where John says, because we keep His commandments, whatever we ask we receive of Him. So we seem to be zeroing in on the key issue here. So if we come over to the book of Galatians now, and we take that reporter, by the way, for the Miami Herald that wrote that lead sentence, Gary Robinson died hungry. Her name was Edna Buchanan. And so we'll take the Edna Buchanan approach to this. How do we take the whole story of Galatians, the whole picture that's being painted through from chapters 1 through 6, how do we take that and express that as briefly and as simply as possible? What verse could we choose? Is there a verse that would take the entire book and present it in such a short, succinct way as we saw in that article? And so I believe there is. And that would be Galatians 5 and verse 6, not even the whole verse, just half the verse. And from the NIV, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. So that would be a good description of what the whole letter is about, is that when you boil it right down, in life, how to live, there's only one way that counts. There's only one way that works. There's only one way that in God's mind is intelligent. There's only one way that counts, only one way that works, and that is faith expressing itself through love. Now, there's a lot of details we can add, as there always is, but that would be the essence of it, to be a person of faith that expresses that faith through love. So that what that would mean practically is that everything in life, day to day, little things, big things, whatever's going on every day, is we look at it through the lens of of believing in Jesus, believing in what he said, believing in what he did in his crucifixion, believing in his resurrection, believing in his present ministry, what he's doing today. Simply believing in Jesus is what the idea would then be, is that I would have faith in Jesus, believe him. And then the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. And so by viewing life through this lens, seeing everything from this perspective, it's going to then motivate me to love people. And how do I love people? 1 John 5, verse 2. We read from 1 John 3 a moment ago. Now chapter 5 and verse 2. John says, by this we know that we love the children of God. So it's faith expressing itself through love. How do you know if you're loving people or not? By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. There it is again. It's that phrase keeps popping up. It's when that's how you know that you love. So faith expressing itself through love would be the same as saying faith in God expressing itself through the keeping of his commandments. That's how we love people. And so what Jesus said and what Paul is here saying are exactly the same thing. Jesus said, if you keep my commandments, or another way of putting that is if you love people, you will live in my love. And Paul says the only thing that counts is faith in God expressing itself through love. So that would be, there we would have it then. We would have the answer. But usually we need more details. That would be the case, which is why Paul wrote a whole letter to the Galatians and not just one verse or half a verse. So let's come back to the beginning again. Come at the book of Galatians again, only we'll just add a little bit, not more, not much, just a couple of more passages, very short passages. Just add a couple verses from chapter 2 and then one verse from chapter 6, and then we'll see what it looks like. And all of this is simply going to be expanding on the idea that the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. So we go back to Galatians 2 and verse 20, as we have in the past. You'll recognize this. In verse 20, I have been crucified with Christ, Paul says. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. So there it is, faith. That's the same faith as what he's speaking about in chapter 5. Faith in the Son of God, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And so this would be the first additional detail, is that the love that I have for other people, the faith that I have in God, and the love that I have for other people is going to be based upon Jesus first loving me. This is actually a very critical detail. God isn't asking us just to go out into the world and love people. He is saying, first of all, believe that I have loved you. Believe that you are a loved person. Our capacity to love other people is not going to extend beyond the degree to which I believe that God has loved me. We love him, it says in 1 John again, 1 John chapter 4, verse 19, we love him because he first loved us. And so the first thing to know, and we're talking about how to live, how life works, just one of the most basic questions of life. And so the first thing we got to zero in on is that Jesus loves me. Jesus loves you. He loves us. He loved us and he gave himself for us. He invested everything. He gave his life for us. He yielded. That word gave is the Greek word that we've mentioned a few times, paradidomai, meaning to yield or to surrender. Jesus gave it all up. He gave it all up for us. He died for us. He loved us. So that's the beginning. And so what I'm being asked to do then, what we're all being asked to do, is to believe in that. The only thing that counts is faith. And so everything in life is going to revolve around this crucifixion and the fact that God did it for you, and your belief that he did it for you. And the effect of this faith is that if I believe that Jesus died and gave himself for me, that he loved me, I am going to, by faith now, want to love him back, and even to the point of yield, to surrender as he did for me, to trust him, follow him. If that's what he did, then that's what I do. If that was the right thing for him, it's also the right thing for me. He loved and gave, I love and give. And this giving now becomes the action of my faith. It's what's energizing, activating my faith. When we read in the beginning of verse 20 where he says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me, he's describing what his faith looks like. He is now yielding progressively to where less and less it's Paul living his own agenda, and it's allowing Christ to live through him. How can Christ do that? Christ can't come in and just take control of us. He doesn't wish to do that. But if we yield to him, surrender to him, then we're allowing him to live his life through us. And so this is what faith looks like. And as we allow Christ to live through us, as we have that yielded heart, then the result is that his grace is going to flow. And the product of his grace, which is power, is that we will now be able to live righteously, or to love people. So as we're reading this in chapter 2, all what's happening is we're getting more details. This is the same thing. The only thing that counts in life is faith, as we're describing it, which works or expresses itself through love. And so we're seeing in an expanded way how faith results in love. So let's read again Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. This is his faith. This is his yieldedness to Christ. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith, and he's been describing that. I live by faith in the Son of God. And what's our faith based on? Who loved me and gave himself for me. And then in verse 21, continuing to describe this process, I do not set aside the grace of God. If he didn't have faith, if he wasn't living, if he was using these other methods, be a good person, do the best I can, pray if you need to, or in the other example is follow the law of Moses, that these different ideas, some having more merit than others, but neither of those two really hitting the nail on the head. If I do that, I'm setting aside the grace of God. But by having faith and yielding, I am not setting aside, I'm allowing the grace to flow, and this is how righteousness comes. He said, if I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. So the thing that I do is faith expressing itself through love. That's what I do. That's how to live. How do I do that? Well, this is what we're describing in Galatians 2. It's by yielding, allowing grace to flow in us, and by grace now I'm empowered to love. I'm empowered to live righteously. I'm empowered to keep his commandments. Where these details are huge. They're huge for me personally. They make totally all the difference in the world. If all I knew was I was supposed to keep his commandments, personally, I would be hindered. I'm not sure how to do that. I try and I don't, it doesn't work. So, there's some confusion there. But these details make it all clear. It's that it is yielding, and yielding allows grace, and by grace righteousness comes. And so this is taking the book of Galatians, we're just adding a little bit more detail to make it all plain. So then we know what to do, which is to live a life of faith expressing itself through love. We're learning how to do it. Here's another key question: why? We come to chapter 6 and verse 8, and Paul says, for he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh. Flesh is anything that's just the human-based, human power, no grace to it, which would partly be the first method that we approach, common approaches in the Christian world, would be partly the do the best I can and pray, is to some degree, it is setting aside the grace of God. It is to some degree, it is sowing to the flesh. But to live according to the law of Moses is completely sowing to the flesh. It is completely setting aside the grace of God. The way to sow to the Spirit, it says in the second half of Galatians 6:8, but he who sows to the Spirit is by everything we've been describing. So we started with one verse in Galatians to describe the whole meaning, and now we're at 3 different passages: Galatians 2:20, Galatians 5 and verse 6, and now Galatians 6 and verse 8. If you sow to the Spirit, meaning if you yield to God, if you have faith in Him, if you trust Him, if you love people, all of that is sowing to the Spirit. All of that is investing in the spiritual way of doing things. Then you will reap everlasting life. So that is not the only reason, but it is one key reason to do this. So now, in just a few verses, we have answering the question, how do you live? How does life work in the kingdom? How can you make life work for you? We have it reduced down to these things. What do? You love people by faith. How do you do it? You yield. Why do you do it? It's because you reap life. And reaping life would be living free from the curse of the law. Reaping corruption would be continuing to live under the curse of the law, even though Christ has redeemed us from it. There's a necessary response. Have we been redeemed from the curse? Absolutely. How do we participate? By faith. What does faith look like? Faith yields and faith loves. And so if you do that, then now you're living in the bountifulness of God. So there we go. So coming back again to the idea that the only thing that counts, okay, that's simple, and that's what we want. That's what we need. Simple. It's the only thing. We have it reduced down to one simple thing. But it can be a complicated thing because we're speaking spiritually now. On a human level, which isn't always spiritual, we as human beings are inclined to think that a lot of other things count. And so that's where our challenge is going to be, is the Bible is saying, I want to know how to live. I want to know how to live successfully. Okay, the only thing that counts is this. And yet where my hindrance is going to be is my own personal belief that other things count. I'm going to have to work through this. I'm going to have to process this. I might think that, in fact, that not only do other things count, but they actually count more than faith expressing itself through love. In fact, I'm sure in many of our lives as Christians, if you were to follow us around and look at what we do all day and what we talk about all day and where our attention is and where our focus and emphasis is, you might come to the conclusion that there are a lot of things that count more than faith expressing itself through love. So there's a process here, and the process centers upon me and my heart. And what do I believe in my heart? So what are some of the things that count with people? It'll vary from person to person. Well, one, and this is the prime example given in Galatians, is religious law and practice. Many people in the world, be it under the banner of Christianity or under the banner of Judaism or one of many different types of religions, give a great degree of emphasis on whatever their religion says. And that's what counts. These very religious rituals and procedures and ideas and laws that people follow. And so one of the things, like if we were to look at Judaism, for example, which is again highlighted in Galatians, Paul mentions some things. He mentions Jewish dietary laws. So in the mind of the religious Jewish person, diet counts. It counts for a lot. You need to eat the right things, you need to eat kosher, you need to not eat the wrong things. So that would be a religious observance. Another thing mentioned in Galatians would be the Jewish calendar, which would mean the schedule throughout the year of various feasts and holy days. And in Jewish religion, that counts. It counts for a lot. A person needs to keep those feasts, needs to do particular things during those feast days. Another thing that is huge in Judaism, and again mentioned in Galatians, is circumcision. Boys need to be circumcised. This is essential. This is the mark, the official mark that a person is a covenant partner with God. And so these are just some examples we're giving. things that count in people's lives. Sometimes people are not religious at all, but things, there are various things, various traditions, various ideas, various practices in their life that count a great deal to them. And so what is Paul saying then? We're talking about the big picture now, how to live in God's world. Paul says they don't count. And so that's one thing to say that. It's one thing for people to hear that, but it's entirely another thing for that to penetrate a person's heart, to where a person truly believes these things don't count. So it doesn't matter what you eat. Not religiously, it doesn't. I mean, sure, there's healthy eating, which I'm not dismissing that, but in terms of what makes us right with God, what puts us in God's favor, eating doesn't count. Days of the week don't count. Circumcision doesn't count. It doesn't matter. Paul's very explicit. It doesn't matter if you're circumcised, doesn't matter if you're not circumcised, because it doesn't count. And so you see, it's not just for us, it's not just a case of focusing in on what does count. It is a case of getting rid of various beliefs in our heart that tell us that things count, and they don't, because it gets in the way. And so this is going to be a process for us. It's God is asking us to make the big bet here. That would be a way of putting it. Brian Mulroney, a former Prime Minister in Canada, he passed away yesterday. And so, of course, in the news, that's a momentous occasion. It's one that is our attention is drawn to. And allow me to emphasize here, as I do at times like this, is that by mentioning Brian Mulroney, I am not being politically partisan. I don't mention him to say that I was in favor of his politics or not in favor of his politics. This is not a politically partisan comment I'm about to make. I'm just going to remark upon one of the observations made about him in the news, and it's probably an accurate observation, and that is that he wasn't afraid to make the big bet. And we can see that in his political career, how he made the big bet on the Meech Lake Accord, and in that case it failed. He made the big bet on a Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, and he was successful in that case. So he was not a person, and this is how he has been described, he was not a person afraid of making the big bet. He was willing to put all his chips on the table. And so that's what you and I are being asked to do by God. We are being asked to make the big bet, to put all our chips on the table, put all our chips on the fact that one thing counts with God, and that is faith expressing itself through love. And by making the big bet, I mean that we give that our focus, give that our time, give that our energy, and do not believe that other things count when they don't. Just to cleanse our heart of these various weights, these beliefs, false beliefs, that all they do is hold us down and pull us back. This is what God is asking us to do. So what are some other things that people might heavily invest in because they believe it counts in life? Physical appearance. Now, is God suggesting that we intentionally look as poorly as possible? No. I mean, if a person can look good, why not look good? But that being said, does this count in terms of how to live successfully? And if the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love, then the answer is no. Again, we're not suggesting that we don't look good. We're just simply saying that in this issue of life, how to make life work for you, a lot of people are going to put a great deal of emphasis on their physical appearance, but in reality it doesn't count. Position in life, positions of influence, positions of power, positions of where people can see, what an important person I am. Does that count in terms of how to live? And again, many people invest a great deal of focus and energy on this, but it doesn't count. Possessions don't count. Does that mean we're not supposed to have possessions? No, of course not. We need possessions. Possessions have a place and a role, an important role in our lives. But when it comes down to where my focus is on what counts, that causes me to live successfully, where I can live free from the curse, then that's not how we keep score, by possessions. It is the only thing that counts is faith, expressing itself through love. Am I willing to make the big bet? This is what God is asking us. What else in the mind of people? What else counts? Well, for many people, it's a big deal, surprisingly so, sometimes shockingly so, simply getting our own way. It's the fight, the squabble, the quarrel, the contention, the continual battle of trying to get our own way. Does that count? Are there any prizes or rewards to the person who most gets their own way in life? And no, there's a lot of things. Now, bear in mind, there's a lot of things we can't compromise, because really it's not our way, it's what God has commanded us. So there's many things we can't yield on to people, because God has already commanded us. And so we're not being a doormat, far from it. It's just that there's a lot of things that aren't important, and there's no prize or reward if you get your own way. And in fact, there is a prize and reward if we do not get our own way, and that is if we instead focus on faith in God and how I don't have to fight with people, because I've been highly honored by God. Jesus died for me. It was unfair. He was made to be a curse so that I would not have to be cursed. I'm actually a very blessed person. I don't have to fight to get every inch of what I think belongs to me. I can let other people have their way. And in fact, in doing so, faith expressing itself through love, that is how I live free from the curse. So things do go my way. Getting our own way, that doesn't count. Fair treatment, that's a huge one. People want to be treated fairly. If somebody, often, I'm not speaking of everybody, but often, if somebody feels they're being treated unfairly, then that is a crisis. It's time to howl. It's a time to make a fuss. It's a time to create some kind of display of some kind. This is wrong. This is unfair. I'm being treated unfairly. Just one example of a million. Sometimes fathers have been known, if their child, their son or their daughter, playing on a sports team, could be on the ice, could be on a field, if they feel the coach is not giving their son or daughter the necessary or appropriate playing time, then they'll get right down on the field. They'll get in the coach's face. They'll start yelling. They're fighting for what in their mind is fair for their daughter or their son. But according to the Bible, does this count? Is this what's going to make our life work? And the answer is no, it isn't. So each of us is going to need, because these issues, in one way or another, are going to bubble to the surface. If not now, then later. If they're in our heart, they will come out. And as they do, I need to be honest enough, I need to be true enough to the gospel that I'm willing to acknowledge, hey, I'm acting, I'm thinking, I'm feeling like something counts here, and the truth is it doesn't. And the point of all of this isn't that I would be, again, a doormat or just walked on or taken advantage of, or somebody who's not smart enough in life to assert their own cause. The purpose is so that I could live in the love of God. Live immersed in His love, live immersed in His blessing. The point isn't that I would lose, it's so that I would win. It's so that I would understand how life works, so that I would understand the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Are we willing to make the big bet? Are we willing to put all our chips on the table? Am I willing to believe that if I do that one thing, that God will fulfill His side of the bargain and make sure that I live the abundant life, that I live immersed in His love? Can I trust Him to do that? Who's willing to make the bet? who's willing to say, okay, count me in. This is the challenge of the gospel. This is the challenge of the book of Galatians. This is the answer to the question, how do we live? How do we live? Simply, plainly, briefly, how do we live? Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.